Welcome back, Bleak Riders, to another episode of Murder, Mystery, and Motorcycles. Today, we have a story written by Tiffany Tarpley from WKYC TV Cleveland. The story dates back to March 26, 2015, and is the story of Darla Kustra. If you like this type of stuff, you like the stuff we do on the channel, think about subscribing. Maybe hit that like button. Trying to do true crime on motorcycles. Hope you all enjoy it. Without further ado, let's get into the story of mystery and murder on motorcycles that I have for you today. On a particularly dark and cold morning in Ohio, a woman goes missing. She didn't show up for work March 26, 2010, and 3 days later, teens walking to a friend's house found a piece of her near an abandoned train track. This was in North Cleveland, a suburb. It was less than a mile from where Darla was working. The rest of her body has never been found, so investigators to this day have not determined whether her likely death was an accident or a homicide. The Lorain, Ohio resident walked everywhere, and police at the time thought maybe a car or truck might have hit her as she walked to work between 4:15 and 5:20 a.m. She had been working for a few days at a plastic recycling plant through a temporary employment agency. The company she was working for called the temp agency to report that Kustra had missed work, but coworkers didn't realize anything was wrong until they saw news reports about the severed limb. They then called police, which led to a DNA test of Kustra's oldest daughter that determined the foot did in fact belong to Kustra. This particular stretch of road was very narrow, and it's possible in those early hours, dark, not thinking about it, maybe a truck hit her and she got tangled up in it. Parts of her possibly tossed here or there down the road, or in fact stuck on the truck and traveling many miles someplace else, maybe even outside Ohio. We'll never really know, it's speculation. In 2010, her ex-husband told the Chronicle Telegram that he last spoke to Kustra 2 or 3 weeks before she disappeared, and saw her 2 months before when he drove her to the grocery store. They had divorced in 1995. The ex-husband had told the paper that Kustra was mentally ill, had no close friends, and was estranged from her 4 daughters and 2 brothers. She also had a grandson. He didn't believe she had ever met him. She was very reclusive, Frank Kustra said. During the exhaustive search, reporters had a chance to talk to other locals, all of which said Kustra was a loner who kept to herself. At the time of this reading, this case is still open. Any leads or any information that could lead to the eventual finding of Kustra should be directed to the Lorain County Sheriff's Office, the Detective Bureau, where the case remains open. We just want to know what happened. That's one case of mystery we can hope gets solved and brings some peace to the family. Hopefully through the retelling of this story, it begins to be brought back to the light, and people think, what happened to Darla? And again, this story was written by Tiffany Tarpley of TV Cleveland, March 26, 2015. And I hope I did her story justice in the retelling of it as a tale for people to know and think about and become aware of and be interested in, and maybe even, just maybe, shed some light on a very cold case. This next story is brought to us by the Library of Congress, listed under Articles and Essays. The murder of Emmett Till. The murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955 brought nationwide attention to racial violence and injustice prevalent in Mississippi. As I read you this story, Remember that Emmett Till was a 14-year-old young man. Do you remember how you were at 14? Maybe you're 14 now and buck wild. It's no excuse for murder. But let's get into it. Emmett went to Bryant's store, where he may or may not have whistled at Carolyn Bryant, the wife of the owner of the store. Rob Bryant and his brother-in-law, J.W. Millam, kidnapped and brutally murdered Emmett Till, dumping his body in the Tallahatchie River. The newspaper coverage and murder trial galvanized a generation of young African Americans to join civil rights movements out of fear that such an incident could happen to them, their friends, or their family. Many interviewees in the Civil Rights History Project remember how this case deeply affected their lives, and it would go on to be known as the Till generation. After the trial and Rob Bryant and his brother's acquittal, Emmett Till's sister, he had two, Joyce and Dory Lander, who grew up with him in Mississippi. They remember keeping a scrapbook about everything that had been written or said about Till, and a fear that their other brothers or themselves could be killed too. Lander's Dory was so inspired by all of this that she ended up going on to law school and trying to understand what went wrong with the system of justice. Why were these murderous men not punished? And it became her quest to try and understand the whole legal system and the equal rights and justice under law. Joyce Landers discussed how much she coined the term the Emmett Till generation, which she used to describe the African American baby boomers in the South who were inspired by Till's murder to join the burgeoning movement of mass meetings, sit-ins, and marches to demand their equal treatment under the law. Can you imagine how helpless they must have felt when two men burst into their home and kidnapped their baby brother, 14 years of age, for maybe whistling at a man's wife? Then they killed him and dumped his body in the river and were acquitted of all charges. That doesn't sound like justice to me. It sounds like murder with very little mystery. Our last story brings us back to the topic at hand: motorcycles. This story was written by a man named Mike on June 12th of 2017 in a publication known as Moto Networks. When I hear the phrase "the rarest motorcycle in the world," it sounds like a gimmick. Something a new boutique brand cooked up to get top dollar for a limited run motorcycle. Yet that's not the case, because that title belongs to a motorcycle that turned 100 years old at the time of this article, yet it is filled with mystery. The story has seen many variations over the years, with some important details changing from time to time. Overall, though, there is a general consensus of how the current events have unfolded and how the story is absolutely legendary. After extensive research, I believe this to be how events unfolded on this magnificent machine. While the machine in question was designed and built in 1916, this story has to start at a point in time much later than that. 50 years later, to be exact. As legends go, they typically get bigger with each retelling, and this story is no different. Now, if you were to ask someone, it's likely they will say the discovery was at a hotel, behind a wall of bricks. This is not the case. You see, in 1967, a Chicago firefighter had just purchased a house located on Paulina Street in a new neighboring town of Cicero. Upon purchasing his new home, he looked to have some leaky pipes replaced. Hiring a plumber in the process, once establishing the fireman's piping issue, it was decided that the easiest repair would be done by going through the exterior wall just beneath the stairs, and that is where the big discovery occurred. Residing behind the wooden exterior between the interior walls sat a motorcycle, and not just any motorcycle, one called the Traub, that garnished plates from 1916. Whose was it? And why was it hidden in the walls of this little house? This is where the plot quickly thickens. To find out about who the Traub belonged to, the firefighter tracked down the elderly old woman that owned the building previously. What he had found was shocking. The motorcycle belonged to her son. At least in a way, her son had stolen the motorcycle back in 1916, presumably from the original owner. This prompted the young man's father to hastily sign him up for the army, where he went away to fight in World War I. Tragically, he did not return home, presumably perishing in battle. The real unknown is how the Traub became entombed in the walls of this house. It could have been the young man doing it, wanting to hold on to his ill-gotten gains. It could have been done by his father, after hearing of his son's untimely death in the war. He felt bad, and he didn't get to ride the motorcycle. Also couldn't stand looking at it. Either way, it ended up preserved in the walls of this Illinois house for almost 50 years. And what happened to the original owner is even more of a mystery. The oddity that is this motorcycle is the fact that it's the only one in existence. That's not because of a warehouse fire that destroyed the last remaining. It's the only one that has ever been created. Even weirder is the fact that this particular machine was incredibly state-of-the-art for 1916. Not only did it sport things like a 3-speed transmission and a brake system never used on an American motorcycle before, but it did so in a time where ingenuity like that would have skyrocketed it to the front page in every territory. Yet it wasn't until 1967 that it first made headlines. As for who built it, we are left with even more questions than answers. Because no one had ever heard of a motorcycle brand called Traub before, and it wasn't reported as being stolen, it was a mystery as to where it came from. Was it a made-up word? Was it someone's name? With some insightful digging, the builder may be able to find out, but it's hard to say. Collectively, the motorcycle community has rallied to try and find this mysterious bike's origins, coming up only a name of some vague information: Gottlieb Richard Traub. It's thought to be the creator of the incredible motorcycle. It is said he had lived from 1883 to 1952. Census reports have him listed as a tool maker, as well as an experimental machinist. Later in life, his later census reports have him as a telescope builder as well. With work experience like that, it's not unlikely that Mr. Traub could have been the man to have designed this unique and mysterious motorcycle from the ground up. At this time, around 1916, there was something like 200 American motorcycle brands trying to make it big, like Indian, Harley-Davidson, making it a real possibility. But the engineering is what sets it apart, having features that Harley and Indian weren't even sporting yet. Further in to suggest that Richard D. Traub's involvement could be in this paper clipping from 1907, featured above. A letter drafted to a Mr. L.H. Cornish had listed specs about the motorcycle: wheelbase, gross weight, tank capacity, even oil amounts. Everything significant for the build or operation of the motorcycle. Right down to washers and where a good place for service would be. It was signed respectfully Richard Trount of 749 North Paulina Street, Chicago, Illinois. Obviously, the biggest takeaway from this is the name signed Richard Trount. The B could very well have been mixed up with the T. If they're reading his handwriting just right, a common typo back then, the second is Traub. Address is Paulina Street, the very street that housed the mystery motorcycle when it was found. This was found out years later, and after the discovery of the motorcycle, which furthers the confusion. Is it a coincidence? Or could this story of a stolen motorcycle be completely fabricated? In the case you aren't already spinning over where and who and why and this motorcycle's pedigree, we have one more piece to add to the puzzle, except it won't make the picture any clearer. See the picture above. That, my friend, is what I call a mystery photo. It exists, but no one is really sure why. Many have scoured for any information related to the photo, Traub's motorcycle shop, with little to no avail. Experts have studied the grainy picture, and it predates before 1910. And some have suggested that the third motorcycle tucked in the back could be the Traub, and his first motorcycle, that was in 1907, was the one listed in the article illustrated. But no one has anything close to concrete evidence, resulting in nothing more than speculation. Everybody, this has been Bleak, reading these stories of mystery, motorcycles, and murder. I hope you enjoyed them. I want to thank you all for coming along on the ride. I want to thank you all for supporting the channel. And if you would, or you haven't already, consider subscribing. Alright, and with that, we'll call it a day. Be safe, everyone.